There are a few things you need to know about my life. It smells like bleach. I work double shifts for a pack that ignores me, and my best friend is a ferret who steals thermometers. But that life ends today. My alpha didn't just gamble away our money, he gambled away me. I'm being delivered to the Dragon King as collateral. I expected to walk into a cage. I didn't expect to walk into the fire. Welcome to Linas Romantasy collection. If you're ready for a romance that bites back, please like, share, and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell icon right now. I love connecting with you. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Summoning. The smell of the vet clinic was a cocktail of bleach, isopropyl alcohol, and the distinct earthy funk of wet dog. For Romy Paddock, it was the perfume of survival. She wiped down the stainless steel exam table, her knuckles white against the rag, trying to ignore the chaotic thrum of the waiting room outside. "Noodle, drop it!" Romy sighed, not bothering to look up. On the counter, a long, slinking tube of fur paused. Noodle, her ferret and emotional support kleptomaniac, froze. In his mouth was a digital thermometer he had pilfered from the supply jar. He stared at her with beady, innocent eyes, looking like a fuzzy criminal caught mid-heist. "That goes in rectums, Noodle. Do you really want that in your stash?" Noodle considered this, gave a defiant squeak, and dropped the thermometer with a clatter before scampering up Romy's arm to nestle in the hood of her oversized scrubs. Her phone buzzed against the metal table. The screen lit up with a name that made her stomach turn over. Alpha Briggs. "Come to the safe house, now." Romy stared at the text. The safe house was a euphemism for a dilapidated warehouse in the industrial district that Briggs used to hide his bad decisions. She stripped off her gloves, grabbed her bag, and marched out to the parking lot. 20 minutes later, Romy parked the Pumpkin, her rust-orange 1990 Volvo 240 wagon, next to Briggs's white Cadillac Escalade. The contrast was offensive. Her car was a tank held together by prayer and duct tape. His was a leased monstrosity that screamed, "I'm compensating." She found Briggs inside the warehouse office, pacing. The air conditioning was broken, and the room smelled of stale cigar smoke and the nervous sweat of a man who owed money to dangerous people. Briggs looked like he was melting. His cheap suit was stained at the armpits, and his receding hairline was slick. "You're late," Briggs snapped, though he didn't stop pacing. "I have a job, Briggs, one that pays for the kibble the pups eat since you stopped allocating funds 3 months ago," Romy said, leaning against the doorframe. She crossed her arms, keeping her expression bored. It was the only way to deal with Briggs. Show fear, and he'd bite. "What is it? Did the gambling debts finally catch up to the electric bill?" Briggs stopped. He turned to her, and for the first time, Romy saw genuine terror in his watery eyes. "It's not the electric company. It's the warden." Romy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the AC. The warden, Bastian Valco, the dragon of Shreveport. He wasn't just a landlord, he was a myth, a shadow that owned half the city and terrified the other half. The pack lived on his land, existing only because he allowed it. "You missed a tribute payment," Romy guessed, her voice dropping. "I missed 6, Briggs confessed, his voice cracking. I thought I could win it back at the tracks. But the interest, Romy, it compounded." "So, we're evicted," Romy said, her mind already racing through logistics. "We have to move the pack. The old farmhouse in Bossier might—" "No," Briggs interrupted, wiping his upper lip. "We aren't evicted. I made a deal. I fixed it." He shoved a piece of paper across the scarred desk. Romy picked it up. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that cost more than her weekly groceries. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and terrified her more than a growl. Collateral transfer agreement. She scanned the legalese. Words like forfeiture and service jumped out at her. Then she saw her name, Romy Paddock. "What is this?" Romy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I couldn't pay him cash, Romy," Briggs pleaded, holding his hands up as if to ward off a blow. He wanted assurance, someone to work off the debt, a service Omega. "You sold me," she whispered. The betrayal hit her like a punch to the gut, stealing her breath. "I worked double shifts to keep your lights on. I patched up your fighters when they were too stupid to duck. And you sold me to a monster?" "I didn't sell the land," Briggs shouted, his cowardice turning into defensive anger. "I saved the territory. I gave the warden collateral. You. It's just a job, Romy. You go to the Valco Tower, you do what he says, and when the debt is paid, you come back." Romy looked at the signature on the bottom. Briggs had already signed it. She wasn't an employee. She was a poker chip Briggs had tossed onto the table to save his own skin. "If I don't go?" she asked. "Then he burns the pack house down with the pups inside," Briggs said flatly. "That's the deal." Romy looked at him, really looked at him, and realized there was nothing left to save here. But she couldn't let the pups burn. "Fine," Romy said, dropping the paper. "I'll go." Chapter 2. The Pumpkin Rides. The Shreveport humidity stuck to Romy's skin like a second, unwanted layer of clothing as she shoved the last cardboard box into the back of the pumpkin. The Volvo's suspension groaned in protest, a metallic complaint that echoed Romy's internal state. She wasn't taking much. Her life fit into surprisingly few containers: clothes, her vet tech books, a few framed photos of her parents before the accident, and Noodle's elaborate tunnel system made of dryer vents. "You got everything, Romy?" Romy turned. Sarah, a young beta with eyes too big for her face, was clutching a ragged teddy bear. Sarah was one of the reasons Romy hadn't left years ago. "I got everything, sweetie," Romy lied. She crouched down, ignoring the pop of her knees. "Listen to me. You're in charge of the treat jar now. Don't let Benny eat the chocolate, okay? It makes him sick." Sarah nodded, tears welling up. "Are you coming back?" "I'm just going on a work trip," Romy said, brushing a stray hair from Sarah's forehead. "To make sure you guys stay safe." She stood up, her chest tight. Leaving the pack wasn't just leaving a location, it was severing a limb. Even a dysfunctional family was still family. But looking at the rundown duplexes and the peeling paint, she realized she had been the glue holding this crumbling structure together for too long. Romy climbed into the driver's seat. Noodle was already in his travel carrier on the passenger seat, scratching frantically at the mesh. "I know, buddy," she murmured. "I hate moving day too." She turned the key. The pumpkin coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with the reliable, heavy vibration of a tractor. Romy put the car in gear, but she didn't head for the exit immediately. She circled the lot and pulled up next to the white Escalade. Briggs was inside the main house, probably drinking to celebrate his narrow escape. The SUV gleamed in the afternoon sun, a symbol of everything wrong with the pack leadership. Romy reached into her center console and pulled out her Swiss Army knife. She stepped out of the car, looking around. The lot was empty. With a calm, practiced motion, she approached the Escalade's rear tire. She didn't slash it, that was amateur. She jammed the blade into the sidewall and twisted. The hiss of escaping air was the most satisfying sound she had heard in years. She moved to the next tire, then the next. "Consider that my severance package," she muttered. Back in the Volvo, she pulled out onto the highway, merging into the traffic heading toward downtown. The skyline of Shreveport was dominated by casinos and bridges, but looming over the Red River, set apart like a judge looking down on a jury, was the Valco Tower. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a weapon carved from obsidian and glass, jutting violently out of the cliffside. It absorbed the sunlight rather than reflecting it. It was stark, cold, and utterly alien to the organic, messy sprawl of the city below. Romy gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. She wasn't a warrior. She was an Omega. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around, to run, to hide in a hole until the predator passed. "We're not running, Noodle," she said aloud, her voice trembling slightly. We're going to survive, and then I'm going to figure out how to bankrupt Briggs for real." She navigated the winding roads up the cliff. The gate to the Valco estate was a massive slab of iron that slid open silently as she approached, scanning her license plate. There were no guards, just cameras that tracked her movement with predatory precision. Romy pulled the pumpkin up to the main entrance. The Volvo looked like a rusted toy parked in front of the massive glass doors. She cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "Showtime," she whispered. She grabbed Noodle's carrier, slung her bag over her shoulder, and stepped out of the safety of her car and into the shadow of the dragon. Chapter 3. The Icebox. The elevator ride up to the penthouse took long enough for Romy to contemplate at least 3 different escape plans, all of which involved rappelling down the side of the building with a ferret strapped to her chest. None were viable. When the doors slid open, the first thing that hit her was the cold. It wasn't just cool, it was meat locker freezing. The air was crisp, dry, and bit at her exposed skin. Romy shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. She stepped into a cavernous living space that looked less like a home and more like a museum of modern brutalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the river, but the gray stone floors and black leather furniture sucked the warmth out of the room. "Hello?" Romy called out. Her voice echoed, sounding small and intrusive. There was no answer, just the low hum of an industrial-grade air conditioning system working overtime. She walked further in, clutching Noodle's carrier. "I'm Romy Paddock. Alpha Briggs sent me. I'm the collateral." Movement in the shadows caught her eye. A figure stepped out from a hallway to her left. Romy's breath hitched, freezing in her lungs. He was massive. Not just tall, though he had to be at least 6'6", but built with a lean, corded density that screamed apex predator. And he was shirtless. His skin was bronzed, a stark contrast to the sterile gray of the room, and even from 10 feet away, Romy could feel the heat radiating off him. He was glistening with sweat, despite the sub-zero temperature of the room. Ink-black hair fell messily over his forehead, and his jaw was set in a hard line, covered in a shadow of stubble. But it was his eyes that pinned her to the spot. They weren't human. They were molten gold, glowing with an internal luminosity that was terrifyingly beautiful. He stopped dead when he saw her. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stared, his nostrils flaring slightly as he inhaled. The silence stretched, thick and viscous. Romy felt a primal urge to drop to her knees and bare her throat, an omega instinct she had spent years suppressing. She locked her knees, forcing herself to stand tall. "He's going to eat me," she thought. "Briggs sent me here as Uber Eats." "Look," Romy said, her voice shaking but audible. "If you're going to eat me, make it quick. I have a shift tomorrow at 8 a.m. and my boss hates no-shows." The giant blinked. The golden glow in his eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by something that looked bizarrely like panic. "I do not eat people," he rumbled. His voice was deep, scraping against the bottom of his chest like tectonic plates shifting. It sounded rusty, as if he hadn't used it in days. "That is unsanitary." Romy blinked. "Oh, okay, good." He took a step toward her. The heat coming off him was palpable now, a wave of warmth fighting the aggressive AC. He looked overwhelmed, his gaze darting from her face to her hands to her feet, as if trying to catalog every inch of her. "You are," he trailed off, pressing a hand to his forehead. He looked like he was in physical pain. Suddenly, the mesh of the carrier on Romy's hip unzipped with a sharp zip. "Noodle, no!" Romy gasped, but the ferret was already loose. Noodle launched himself from the carrier, landed on the expensive slate floor, and did a skittering burnout before charging straight at the Dragon King. "Noodle!" Romy lunged, but she was too slow. The ferret scrambled up the man's denim-clad leg, hooked his claws into the waistband, and shimmied up his bare torso. The Dragon King froze. He stood perfectly still, his arms held out to his sides like a scarecrow, his eyes wide with horror. It is on me," he whispered, staring down at the brown ball of fluff currently navigating his pectoral muscle. Noodle reached the man's neck and stopped. He curled around the back of the dragon's neck, burrowing into the damp hair, chattering happily. He had found the warmest thing in the room. "Please," the man said, his voice laced with genuine terror. "Remove the creature. I do not want to crush it." Romy stared. The terrifying warlord of Shreveport, the man who held her life in his hands, was currently being held hostage by a 2-pound weasel. "He likes you," Romy said, stepping forward cautiously to retrieve her pet. "You run hot. He's a heat leech." She reached up, her fingers brushing against the man's burning skin as she grabbed Noodle. A static shock, sharp and blue, snapped between them. The man jerked back as if burned, his golden eyes flaring wide. Chapter 4. The Guest Wing. The static shock lingered in the air, smelling faintly of ozone. Romy clutched Noodle to her chest, stepping back. The man, Bastian, was rubbing his chest where she had touched him, looking at her as if she were a radioactive isotope he didn't know how to handle. "I apologize," Bastian murmured, taking a distinct step away from her. He grabbed a black t-shirt from the back of a sofa and pulled it on quickly, though the fabric seemed to cling to his damp skin. "My static charge is high today." "Right," Romy said, shoving Noodle back into his carrier and engaging the safety lock. "Physics, got it." Bastian cleared his throat. He refused to meet her eyes, focusing instead on a point somewhere over her left shoulder. "I was not expecting you today." Briggs was unclear on the timeline. "Briggs is unclear on everything except his poker losses," Romy said dryly. "So where do I go? Do you have a dungeon? A servant's quarters? A cupboard under the stairs?" Bastian flinched. "Follow me." He turned and walked down a long, glass-walled corridor. Romy had to jog to keep up with his long strides. The hallway opened into a wing of the penthouse that smelled of lemon polish and disuse. He opened a set of double mahogany doors and gestured inside. Romy stopped. It wasn't a cell. It was a suite larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed with a velvet duvet dominated the room. There was a sitting area with a fireplace, a private balcony, and an ensuite bathroom that Romy could see featured a soaking tub deep enough to drown in. "This is the guest room?" Romy asked, skeptical. "It is the East Wing suite," Bastian said stiffly. "The linens are fresh. The kitchen is fully stocked. If you require anything else—" Romy walked into the room, spinning in a slow circle. It was lavish, too lavish. Briggs had said she was a service omega. In the shifter world, that usually meant cooking, cleaning, and other things. Things involving silk sheets. She turned to face him, her jaw tight. "Look, Mr. Valco, Warden, whatever I call you." "Bastian," he corrected softly. "Bastian," she said. "Let's get the ground rules straight. I am here to work off a debt. I will scrub your floors, I will cook your meals, I will do your taxes if you want. But I am not a concubine. I don't warm beds." Bastian's head snapped up. For the first time, he looked her directly in the eye, and the gold fire flared with sudden, sharp indignation. "I would never," he growled. The sound vibrated in Romy's chest, deep and resonant. "I do not take what is not freely given. Do you think me a savage?" "I think you accepted a person as collateral," Romy countered, holding her ground despite the urge to cower. "That doesn't scream gentleman." Bastian looked away, his jaw working. "Briggs offered you or the land. I took the option that didn't involve evicting 30 families onto the street. I intended for you to simply be here, safe, until Briggs settles his accounts." Romy paused. He took her to save the pack from homelessness? It didn't fit the villain narrative Briggs had spun. "So I just stay here?" she asked. "Yes." He backed out of the room, looking desperate to escape. "I will leave you to settle in." He closed the heavy doors with a soft click. Romy stood in the silence for a moment. Then instinct kicked in. She rushed to the door and grabbed the handle. It turned easily. She opened it. The hallway was empty. She closed it again and examined the lock. It was a heavy iron deadbolt. But when she looked closer, she realized the thumb turn was on the inside. There was no keyhole on the outside. She could lock him out. He couldn't lock her in. Romy leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door. He wasn't keeping her prisoner. He was giving her a fortress. "Okay, Noodle," she whispered, letting the ferret out again. "Maybe he's not a monster, or maybe he's just a really weird one." Chapter 5. The Thermostat War. 2 hours later, Romy was shivering violently. The novelty of the luxury suite had worn off, replaced by the reality that Bastian Valco apparently lived in a meat locker. She was wearing 2 pairs of socks, her scrub pants, a t-shirt, and her oversized gray hoodie, and her teeth were still chattering. "It has to be 60 degrees in here," she muttered, rubbing her arms. Noodle was curled up inside her hood, smart enough to use her body heat. She marched out into the hallway. It was even colder there. She found a Nest thermostat on the wall near the kitchen. The digital display glowed an icy blue, 58 degrees Fahrenheit. "Are you trying to preserve meat?" Romy hissed at the device. She spun the dial. The numbers climbed. 68, 70, 72. A satisfying click signaled the heater kicking on. Warm air began to drift from the vents. Romy sighed, closing her eyes. Oh, sweet warmth. 10 minutes later, a door slammed on the other side of the penthouse. Heavy footsteps thundered toward her. Bastian appeared around the corner. He had stripped off his t-shirt again. His skin was flushed a dark, angry red, and sweat was streaming down his chest in rivulets. He looked like he had just run a marathon in a sauna. "What?" he panted, glaring at her. "Did you do?" "I turned up the heat," Romy said, crossing her arms. "Because I don't have fur, and hypothermia isn't in my job description." Bastian stalked past her to the thermostat. He stared at the 72 degrees Fahrenheit like it was a declaration of war. He spun it back down. 60 degrees Fahrenheit. "I overheat," he rasped, leaning his forehead against the wall, breathing hard. "My metabolism, it runs hot. If the ambient temperature is too high, I cannot regulate." "Well, I underheat," Romy argued. "I'm anemic and I weigh 120 pounds soaking wet. If it's 60 degrees, my fingers turn blue." Bastian turned to look at her. He took in her layered clothing, the hood pulled up, the shivering. His expression shifted from annoyance to something resembling guilt. "You are cold," he stated, as if discovering a new law of physics. "Freezing," Romy confirmed. "I can't live like this, Bastian. I'll turn into a popsicle." Bastian looked at the thermostat, then back at her. He looked tortured. He wiped sweat from his eyes. "Wait here," he commanded. He disappeared into his room. Romy waited, wondering if he was getting eviction papers. He returned a moment later carrying a large, plush bundle. He shoved it into her arms. "It is a heated throw blanket," he said gruffly. "Industrial strength. It plugs into the wall. It has settings." Romy looked down at the velvet soft blanket. It was gray and looked expensive. "You want me to walk around wearing a blanket?" "I cannot have the air above 65, Bastian admitted, looking miserable. "Please, take the blanket. I will adjust the temperature to 65, but no higher." Romy looked at him. He was literally dripping sweat for her. The compromise was ridiculous, but he was trying. "Fine," Romy said, clutching the blanket. 65, and I get to wear this like a cape." "Acceptable," Bastian grunted. He turned the dial to 65. As the AC kicked back on with a roar, Bastian let out a long sigh of relief, the red flush already fading from his skin. Romy plugged the blanket into the nearest outlet, wrapped it around her shoulders, and sat on the couch. "This is weird," she told Noodle, who poked his head out to sniff the warm fabric. But at least we're warm. Chapter 6. The Service. Omega. Romy woke up to the silence of a tomb and the warmth of a cocoon. For a disorienting moment, she panicked, thrashing against the gray velvet weight pressing her down. Then she remembered. The penthouse. The meat locker air conditioning. The heated blanket Bastian had practically thrown at her like a grenade. She sat up, her hair a static-charged disaster. The digital clock on the bedside table read 6 a.m. In the pack house, the younger pups would be awake, demanding breakfast. Here, the silence was heavy, broken only by the low, expensive hum of the ventilation system, keeping the suite at a crisp 65 degrees. "Okay," Romy whispered to the empty room. "Day 1 of being collateral." She wasn't going to sit around. Briggs had signed a paper calling her a service omega. While Bastian had recoiled at the concubine implication, debts were debts. Romy Paddock didn't take charity, and she certainly didn't freeload in million-dollar penthouses. If she was here, she was going to be useful. She extracted herself from the heated blanket, shivering as the cool air hit her legs. She pulled her oversized hoodie back on, checked on a sleeping Noodle, who was curled up in a nest of her socks, and marched out into the main living area. The kitchen was a disaster of neglect. It wasn't dirty in the rotting food sense. It was chaotic in the bachelor who eats protein bars over the sink sense. There were unopened boxes of high-end cookware stacked on the counters, a layer of dust on the marble island, and a sink full of rinsed but unwashed shaker bottles. "Right," Romy muttered, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's earn our keep." She found the cleaning supplies under the sink, untouched, naturally, and went to work. She scrubbed the granite until it gleamed. She unpacked the cookware, organizing the pots by size with a ferocity usually reserved for combat. She was an omega. Creating order from chaos was hardwired into her DNA, a survival mechanism she wielded like a weapon. By 7:30 a.m., she was sweating despite the chill, aggressively polishing a copper kettle. She didn't hear him enter. A low, vibrating growl rumbled through the kitchen, deep enough to rattle the silverware in the drawer. Romy spun around, brandishing a microfiber cloth like a shiv. Bastian stood in the doorway. He was wearing black sweatpants and nothing else. His skin flushed a dark, angry red. His hair was wet, likely from a cold shower that hadn't worked. He stared at the organized counters, the gleaming sink, and finally at Romy, who was holding a bottle of spray cleaner. "What?" he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "Are you doing?" "Cleaning," Romy said, lifting her chin. "The place was a wreck. You have a 6-burner Viking range that was being used as a shelf for mail." Bastian walked into the room. The temperature seemed to spike 5 degrees instantly. He looked agitated, his hands opening and closing at his sides. "Stop," he commanded. "I'm almost done, I just need to—" "I said stop." He closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. "You are not a maid. You are not a servant. You do not scrub floors in my house." "Then what am I, Bastian?" Romy snapped, stepping toward him rather than away. "I'm collateral. That means I have value. If I'm not working, I'm just a leech, and I don't do charity." "You are a guest!" Bastian roared, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "I brought you here to keep you safe, not to have you inhaling bleach fumes." He reached out, intending to take the spray bottle from her hand. Romy, fueled by adrenaline and a lifetime of being managed by alphas, jerked her hand back. "Don't tell me what to do with my time!" Bastian lunged, not to hurt her but to stop her frantic scrubbing. His large hand closed around her wrist. Snap! The moment his skin touched hers, a violent crack of blue static electricity exploded between them. It wasn't a static shock from a carpet. It was a localized lightning strike. The air smelled instantly of ozone and burnt sugar. Above them, the filament in the industrial pendant light flared white-hot and then exploded. Pop. Glass rained down onto the newly polished island. Romy gasped, yanking her arm back. Her skin tingled where he had grabbed her, a numbness spreading up to her elbow. Bastian stumbled back, clutching his own hand. He looked horrified. He looked at the shattered bulb, then at Romy's wide eyes. He choked out, backing away until he hit the refrigerator. "Do not touch me! Do not work!" He turned and fled the room, leaving Romy standing in the dark, smelling the ozone of a storm that had just started. Chapter 7. The Hoard. The shattered light bulb was a warning shot. Romy swept up the glass in silence, her hands shaking slightly. The shock hadn't hurt, exactly. It felt more like sticking a fork in a toaster, but the look on Bastian's face had been devastating. He looked like a monster who had just confirmed his own worst fears. "He's terrified of himself," she whispered to Noodle, who had wandered out to inspect the glass shards. "He's not mean, Noodle. He's a hazard." Noodle chattered, unimpressed by the emotional turmoil, and promptly darted between her legs. "Hey, get back here!" The ferret was fast. He scurried out of the kitchen, nails clicking on the slate floor, and bolted down a hallway Romy hadn't explored yet. It was opposite the east wing, darker and cooler than the rest of the penthouse. "Noodle, if you poop in $1 million shoe, we are getting evicted," Romy hissed, sprinting after him. The hallway ended at a heavy, reinforced steel door. It looked like the entrance to a bank vault. To Romy's horror, the door was slightly ajar. Noodle squeezed through the gap, his long tail vanishing into the darkness. Romy hesitated. This was clearly the forbidden room, the inner sanctum. Every fairy tale she knew started with a girl opening a door she wasn't supposed to. "Noodle," she whispered. A crash echoed from inside. "Oh, God!" She pushed the heavy door open and slipped inside. She expected a dragon's hoard. She expected piles of gold coins, jewels, maybe a few skeletons of knights who had tried to slay him. She expected opulence. What she found was a Radio Shack from 1985. The room was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling industrial shelving. But instead of gold, the shelves were packed with vintage analog technology. There were synthesizers with wood paneling, massive vacuum tube amplifiers, and reel-to-reel tape decks. On a velvet-lined shelf, a row of vintage gold mechanical watches ticked in perfect unison. In the corner, a collection of first-edition Game Boys was displayed like crown jewels. "What in the world?" Romy breathed. Noodle was currently sitting on top of a disassembled Technics 1200 turntable, batting at the tone arm. "Noodle, don't!" Romy lunged, scooping the ferret up. She looked down at the turntable. The drive belt had snapped off, likely Noodle's doing, and the platter was askew. "Who enters?" A voice boomed from the doorway. Romy jumped, spinning around. Bastian stood there, leaning against the doorframe. He had put a shirt on, a black Henley that was strained across his chest, but he looked exhausted. Noodle ran in. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." Romy clutched the ferret, waiting for the explosion. "Is this your hoard?" Bastian walked into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked embarrassed. A faint flush crept up his neck. "Modern technology," he said quietly, running a hand over a dusty Moog synthesizer, "is fragile. Silicon chips cannot withstand my electromagnetic field. If I get angry or excited, phones melt, servers crash." He looked at her, his golden eyes guarded. "Analog is durable. Vacuum tubes can handle the surge. It is tactile, real." Romy looked at the room with new eyes. It wasn't junk. It was a collection of things that wouldn't break when he touched them. It was a sanctuary for a man who destroyed everything else. She set Noodle down, keeping a foot on his tail lightly, and turned back to the turntable. "The platter is misaligned. My dad had one of these. It's a direct drive quartz lock, right?" Bastian blinked. "Yes." Romy reached out. She ignored the way Bastian flinched, expecting her to smash it. With deft, practiced fingers, she reseated the heavy magnetic platter onto the spindle, feeling it click perfectly into the motor assembly. She spun it once. It moved silently, perfectly smooth. "Fixed," she said, wiping dust from her hands on her hoodie. Bastian stared at the turntable. Then he stared at her. He looked as if she had just performed open-heart surgery. "You fixed it," he murmured. "It wasn't broken, just dislocated," Romy said with a shrug. "Like I said, I like to be useful." Bastian looked at her hands, small, capable, and currently covered in dust. A strange expression crossed his face, a softening of the hard lines around his mouth. "You are the first person," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble that vibrated the floorboards, "to touch my hoard without breaking it." Chapter 8. The Lincoln. The next morning, Romy stood at the front door of the penthouse, engaged in a standoff. "I am going to work," she stated, clutching her car keys. "It is unsafe," Bastian countered. He was blocking the door, looking massive and immovable. "Briggs is desperate. He knows you are here. If you leave, you are a target." "I have bills, Bastian. I have a car insurance payment. I have a ferret with a liver treat addiction. Unless you're putting me on the payroll, I go to the clinic." Bastian's jaw worked. He clearly wanted to lock her in the tower like a princess in a fairy tale, but he seemed to recall how well the cleaning incident had gone yesterday. "Fine," he grunted, "but you do not take the Volvo. It is a rust bucket. A stiff breeze would crush it." "The pumpkin is a tank," Romy argued, offended. "It has survived 3 hurricanes." "I will drive you," Bastian said, grabbing a set of keys from a bowl near the door. "In a real vehicle." 10 minutes later, they were in the underground garage. Romy stopped dead. "That," she said, pointing, "is a mob boss car." Bastian opened the passenger door of the matte, black 1969 Lincoln Continental. The car was a behemoth, wide as a boat and heavy as a vault. It had suicide doors and tinted windows dark enough to hide a vampire. "It is reinforced steel," Bastian said, ignoring her critique. "Bulletproof glass, run-flat tires. Get in." The interior smelled of old leather and Bastian, sandalwood and smoke. Romy sank into the seat, feeling ridiculously small. Bastian slid into the driver's side, the engine roaring to life with a deep, throaty growl that matched its owner. The drive into the city was tense. Bastian drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. The AC in the car was blasted to the max, naturally. They hit a red light in a gritty part of downtown, a few blocks from the clinic. A lowered Honda Civic with a mismatched bumper pulled up alongside them. The windows rolled down, revealing 3 men. Romy stiffened. She recognized the tattoos on their necks, the jagged teeth of the River Rat Pack, a rival wolf gang that scavenged the edges of Briggs's territory. The driver leaned out, leering at Romy through the Lincoln's window. "Yo, is that Paddock's stray?" the man shouted, whistling. "Hey, sweetheart, ditch the hearse and come for a ride. We got room in the back." Romy stared straight ahead, her grip tightening on her bag. "Ignore them. Just drive." Bastian didn't drive. He turned his head slowly to look at the Honda. He lowered his aviators just an inch. Romy felt the temperature in the car spike. The leather seat beneath her grew warm. "Bastian, don't," she whispered. Bastian's eyes glowed molten gold. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the wolf in the Honda. Suddenly, a loud hiss erupted from the Honda's hood. Smoke billowed out, thick and white. The radiator cap blew off with a violent pop, hitting the windshield. "What the hell?" the wolf screamed, scrambling out of the car as steam engulfed the engine block. "It's melting! The block is melting!" The light turned green. Bastian calmly rolled up his window, pushed his sunglasses back up, and pressed the accelerator. The Lincoln glided away, leaving the panicking wolves behind in a cloud of steam. "Did you just—" Romy stared at him. "Did you look at their car and melt it?" Bastian's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "The cooling system was faulty," he said flatly. "A common issue in inferior vehicles." Romy watched him. He was terrifying. He was dangerous, and he had just fried an engine block because someone catcalled her. She fought a smile. "Remind me never to cut you off in traffic." Chapter 9. The Vet Clinic. When they pulled up to the clinic, Bastian put the Lincoln in park but didn't unlock the doors. "I will wait here," he announced. "For 8 hours?" Romy asked, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Bastian, you can't just sit in the parking lot like a gargoyle. Go home. Play with your synthesizers." "I have emails," he lied. He pulled out a sleek tablet. "I will work from the car. Go, do your vet things." Romy rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Having a dragon in the parking lot was surprisingly reassuring after the incident at the stoplight. The shift was brutal. Saturday meant emergency intakes. Romy drained abscesses, trimmed angry cat claws, and assisted in a C-section for a bulldog. She lost herself in the rhythm of the work, the smell of antiseptic grounding her. This was who she was. Not collateral, not a pet. A healer. Around noon, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She stripped off a latex glove and answered. "Paddock." "You think you're clever, don't you?" Briggs's voice was slurred, venomous. "Living in the tower, sleeping on silk." Romy stepped into the supply closet, lowering her voice. "I'm working, Briggs. Something you should try." "You blocked my number," Briggs spat. "You think the warden protects you? He's using you, girl. Once he gets bored, he'll toss you out. And when he does, you still belong to me. The debt isn't paid until I say it is." "The contract says I serve him," Romy snapped. "Not you. You signed me away. Deal with it." "I own the building you're standing in, Romy," Briggs shouted. "Through the shell company. I can shut that clinic down tomorrow. I can put all your little friends out of a job. Unless you bring me something valuable, something from his hoard." Romy hung up. Her fingers trembled as she navigated the menu and hit block collar. Her hands were shaking. Briggs was petty enough to do it. He would burn her livelihood just to spite her. She finished her shift in a daze. When she walked out into the parking lot at 5 p.m., the sun was low and angry. The Lincoln was still there, a black void in the asphalt sea. She opened the door and slid in. Bastian looked up from his tablet. He assessed her instantly, the slump of her shoulders, the scent of distress. "Who?" he asked. One word, heavy as an anvil. "Briggs," Romy admitted, buckling up. "He called. He says he owns the building through a shell company. He threatened to shut the clinic down if I don't." She stopped. She couldn't tell him Briggs wanted her to steal. Bastian didn't press her. He simply tapped his tablet screen 3 times. "What are you doing?" "My lawyer," Bastian said calmly. "It appears there was a filing error with the property deed for the clinic. The LLC was delinquent on taxes. I just purchased the lien." Romy stared at him. "You what?" "I bought the building," Bastian clarified, putting the tablet away. 10 seconds ago. Briggs no longer owns the clinic. I do. Your job is safe." Romy's mouth fell open. "You bought a building because I had a bad phone call." "I invest in local businesses," Bastian said, putting the car in gear. He looked smug. "Check the glove box." Romy opened the glove box. Noodle popped out, holding a pair of gold-rimmed aviator sunglasses in his paws. He chattered triumphantly. "Noodle!" Romy gasped. "You brought him with you?" "He was bored," Bastian said, actually smiling. "And he has excellent taste in eyewear." Chapter 10. The Storm. The Louisiana sky turned a bruised purple by the time they reached the tower. The air was thick enough to chew, heavy with moisture and electricity. "Storm coming," Romy murmured, looking out the penthouse window. The wind was already whipping the Red River into a frenzy below. "A bad one," Bastian agreed. He was pacing, his skin flushed. The atmospheric pressure was messing with him. Dragons were creatures of weather. Storms made his inner fire restless. At 8 p.m., the sky broke open. Rain lashed against the glass like bullets. Thunder shook the foundation of the tower. And then, the lights died. The hum of the industrial AC cut out instantly. The silence was deafening. "Backup generators?" Romy asked into the darkness. "They take a minute." Bastian's voice came from the shadows, strained. But a minute passed, then 10. The generators didn't kick on. The SMART building had been dumbed down by a lightning strike to the main grid. In the silence, the heat began to rise. Without the AC battling Bastian's internal temperature, the penthouse warmed up fast. It went from 65 to 75 in minutes. "Bastian!" Romy called out. She fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark. The room was empty. "Stay back." Bastian's voice rasped from the far corner of the living room, near the glass wall. Romy swung the light toward him. He was huddled on the floor, his back to the glass. He had stripped off his shirt. His skin was glowing, literally glowing, with a faint ember-red light under the surface. The air around him shimmered like heat haze on asphalt. "The cooling system is down," Bastian panted. "I cannot regulate. I will burn you. Stay away." Romy stood there shivering, but not from cold this time. She was shivering because she was looking at a creature of myth, unmasked. He looked in pain. He looked lonely, and Romy Paddock was always cold. She took a step toward him. "Romy, no!" he roared, a sound that was half man, half beast. "I am dangerous." "You're a furnace," she whispered. She turned off her flashlight. She didn't need it. He was bright enough. She walked across the room, navigating by the red glow of his skin. The closer she got, the warmer it became. It felt like walking toward a campfire on a winter night. She stopped inches from him. He was trembling, his golden eyes wide with panic. "Please," he begged, "run!" Romy didn't run. She knelt on the floor in front of him. She reached out. "I'm tired of being cold, Bastian," she said softly. She pressed her hand flat against his burning chest. He flinched as if shot. The static shock snapped, blue against red, but Romy didn't pull away. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. He smelled of wood smoke and ozone. He was burning up, but to her, it felt like comfort. "You're not burning me," she whispered. "You're just warm." Bastian let out a shuddering breath, his resistance crumbling. Slowly, terrified of his own strength, he wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. For the first time in centuries, the dragon wasn't alone in the dark. She was holding the only thing in the world that didn't melt when he touched it. Chapter 11. Moth to a Flame. The darkness in the penthouse was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against the glass walls. Outside, the storm raged with the fury of a hurricane, wind battering the skyscraper like a titan trying to gain entry. Inside, the silence was broken only by the ragged breathing of the man, no, the creature, curled against the far wall. Romy didn't move. She couldn't. She was kneeling on the slate floor, her arms wrapped around Bastian's torso, her forehead resting against the junction of his neck and shoulder. He was scorching. To anyone else, the heat radiating from his skin would have been alarming, perhaps even painful. It was the heat of a fever spike, of a car engine running without coolant. But Romy Paddock had spent her entire life cold. She was anemic, underweight, and perpetually shivering in the drafty packhouse. To her, Bastian felt like life. "Romy," Bastian groaned, his voice a vibrating rumble against her chest. He tried to pull away, his muscles bunching under her hands. "Let go. I am too hot. I will burn you." "You're not burning me," Romy whispered, tightening her grip. She ignored the prickle of static electricity that danced across her skin where they touched, a constant, low-level buzz of blue energy. You feel like a radiator. Don't move." Bastian froze. He seemed terrified of his own strength, terrified that a sudden movement would shatter her. His skin was glowing with a faint, ember-red luminescence, casting eerie shadows across the room. It wasn't just heat, it was light. He was bioluminescent with power. "The grid is down," Bastian rasped, his head falling back against the glass wall. "The cooling systems, they keep my core temperature stable. Without them, you're a glow stick," Romy murmured, lifting her head to look at him. In the red light of his own skin, his eyes were pools of molten gold, wide and dilated. He looked stripped raw, all his billionaire armor and landlord arrogance melted away by the simple biological reality of what he was. He wasn't a man in a suit. He was a dragon trying to exist in a world made of cardboard. "Why do you not run?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the thunder outside. "I am a monster, Romy. I am a walking fusion reactor. Briggs sent you here to be consumed." "Briggs is an idiot," Romy said softly. She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. The stubble was rough against her fingertips. "And I don't run from warmth, Bastian. I run to it." She shifted, settling herself more comfortably between his legs, effectively trapping him against the wall. It was a bold move, one that defied every survival instinct an Omega wolf should have had in the presence of an apex predator. But the fear was gone, replaced by a gravitational pull she couldn't name. Bastian shuddered. Slowly, agonizingly, he stopped fighting his own instincts. His large hands, trembling slightly, came up to hover over her back. He hesitated, afraid to make contact. "Touch me," Romy commanded softly. He did. His hands settled on her waist, heavy and grounding. The heat from his palms soaked through her scrub top instantly. It was intoxicating. "You are cold," he observed, his brow furrowing as he sensed her lower body temperature. "Always," she admitted. "Until now." Bastian let out a long, ragged exhale, and the tension drained from his massive frame. He slumped forward, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "You smell like rain," he murmured, "and vanilla. It quiets the fire." They stayed like that for hours as the storm battered Shreveport, a wolf seeking shelter in the fire, and a dragon finding the one thing he couldn't destroy. Chapter 12. The Truth. The storm outside had settled into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the glass, but the power was still out. The penthouse remained a cavern of shadows, illuminated only by the fading ember glow of Bastian's skin. He had cooled slightly, his internal reactor settling down now that he was calm, but he was still comfortably warm. They were sitting side by side on the floor now, backs against the sofa. Romy had refused to leave his side, and Bastian seemed to have accepted her presence as a necessary anchor. "So," Romy said, breaking the silence. She picked at a loose thread on her scrub pants. "Fire Drake, I thought you guys were extinct, like knights and lances extinct." Bastian stared into the dark. "We were effective," he said, his tone devoid of pride. "Too effective. Humans feared the fire. Shifters feared the power. Alliances were made. Hunts were organized." He turned to look at her, the gold in his eyes dimming to a somber amber. "I am the last, Romy. My lineage ended 300 years ago in the ashes of a mountain range in the Carpathians. I survived because I was small, because I hid." Romy felt a pang of sympathy that twisted her gut. "That's why you live in a fortress. That's why you hoard old tech." "I break things," Bastian confessed. He held up his hand, looking at it as if it were a weapon. "Modern things, fragile things, people. My energy field disrupts electrical currents. My heat warps metal. I isolate myself to protect the world, not to protect myself." He looked at her, his expression unguarded. "I have spent centuries in silence, watching, owning, but never touching." Romy reached out and took his hand. The static shock was barely a tickle now, a familiar greeting. "You haven't broken me." "Yet," Bastian whispered darkly. "I'm tougher than I look," Romy countered. "I survived Briggs. I survived the pack." She drew her knees up to her chest. "You know, wolves talk about the pack like it's this wholly supportive family. But for an Omega, it's just a hierarchy of who gets to kick you. I patched up their fighters. I balanced their ledgers. I cooked their meals. I was useful. Utility. Like a toaster or a wrench." She rested her chin on her knees, looking at him. "Briggs didn't sell me because he hated me. He sold me because he thought I was a currency he could spend. I wasn't a person to him. I was just collateral." Bastian's grip on her hand tightened, his skin heating up again, not with distress this time, but with anger. "You are not a tool, Romilly. You are not currency." "And you're not a monster," she replied firmly. "You're just a guy with a really intense HVAC requirement." Bastian let out a sound that might have been a laugh, rusty and low. "A gross oversimplification." "Maybe," Romy smiled, squeezing his hand. "But we're a pair, aren't we? The tool and the monster, both of us hiding in this tower." Bastian looked at her, and the intensity of his gaze made Romy's breath hitch. He lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle, reverent, and searingly hot. "I will not let them use you again," he vowed. The promise hung in the heavy air, solid as stone. "You are under my protection now, and the dragon protects his own." Romy's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew, logically, that this was the mate bond talking. But looking at the lonely king in the dark, she realized she didn't care about logic anymore. She just wanted to stay in the fire. Chapter 13. Domestic Bliss. The power returned the next morning with a blinding flash of overhead lights and the aggressive beep of the kitchen appliances resetting. Life in the penthouse settled into a strange, comfortable rhythm over the next 2 days. It was a domesticity Romy had never experienced. There was no shouting, no demands for money, no violence. Just quiet breakfasts, the hum of the AC, firmly at 65 degrees, and the click-clack of Noodle's claws on the slate. Bastian was awkward, but trying. He followed her around like a lost puppy, a 6'6" muscular puppy capable of incineration. If she was cooking, he was standing nearby, handing her spices before she even asked for them. If she was reading, he sat on the opposite end of the couch, watching her over the top of his tablet. On Tuesday evening, Romy decided the silence needed a soundtrack. She marched into the hoard room, which Bastian now left unlocked, and selected a vinyl record. Tears for Fears, songs from the big chair. She set it on the Technic's turntable she had fixed. The crackle of the needle hitting the groove filled the penthouse, followed by the synth-heavy intro of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. In the kitchen, Bastian looked up from his chopping board. He was cutting vegetables with surgical precision. 1985, he commented. A good year for synthesizers. A good year for dancing, Romy corrected. She slid across the floor in her socks, using a wooden spoon as a microphone. Come on, landlord, shake a tail feather. Bastian looked horrified. I do not shake feathers. You're tapping your foot, Romy pointed out, grinning. He was. He stopped immediately, scowling, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Suddenly, a metallic jingle echoed from the hallway. Bastian froze. He patted his pocket. My keys! Romy spun around. Noodle? Down the hallway, the brown streak of fur was already moving. Noodle had the master key ring in his mouth, a heavy iron ring holding the keys to the penthouse, the garage, the clinic, and the subterranean city tunnels Bastian controlled. The keys were dragging on the floor, sparking as the ferret sprinted with surprising strength. Noodle, drop it! Romy yelled, taking off in pursuit. That key opens the floodgates! Bastian roared, abandoning the vegetables and sprinting past her. The chase was on. Noodle drifted around a corner, scrabbling for traction on the polished stone. He darted under a console table. Bastian, too large to fit, dropped to his knees and reached under. "Give it to me, you thief," Bastian growled. Noodle chirped a war cry and bit Bastian's finger, gently, before shooting out the other side. He scrambled up the curtains. "He's going for the high ground!" Romy shouted, grabbing a sofa cushion. "Flank him!" Bastian looked at her, bewildered. "Flank the weasel? Just do it!" Bastian moved to the left, blocking the exit. Noodle, realizing he was cornered, looked from Bastian to Romy. He made a calculation. He dropped the keys, did a backflip off the curtain rod, landed on Bastian's shoulder, and immediately began grooming Bastian's ear as if nothing had happened. The heavy keys hit the floor with a clang. Bastian stood there, a tiny ferret cleaning his ear, looking utterly defeated. He looked at Romy, who was breathless and laughing, clutching a cushion like a shield. And then it happened. Bastian laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a deep, rusty, bell-shaking sound that rumbled up from his chest. He laughed until his shoulders shook, reaching up to cup the ferret against his neck. "He is a menace," Bastian wheezed, smiling, a real, genuine smile that transformed his face from terrifying to devastatingly handsome. "He is an absolute criminal." Romy stared at him, her laughter fading into something softer, warmer. The music swelled in the background. Seeing him like this, happy, unguarded, holding her pet, Romy felt a terrifying lurch in her chest. She wasn't just safe here, she was falling for him, and that was infinitely more dangerous than any dragon. Chapter 14. The Demand. The bubble of domestic bliss didn't pop, it was punctured by a vibration in Romy's pocket. She was sitting on the balcony, wrapped in her heated blanket, watching the sun set over the Red River. Bastian was inside on a conference call with the city council, his voice a low murmur through the glass. Romy pulled out her phone. A text message. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped. She knew instantly. "You blocked me. Cute. But you can't block the debt." Romy's fingers shook as she typed back. "The debt is paid. Bastian bought the building. You have no leverage." The response was immediate. "He bought the building. He didn't buy my debts to the Vipers. They want cash, Romy. Liquid assets. Tonight." Romy stood up, pacing the small balcony. The Vipers were a shifter gang known for breaking kneecaps first and asking questions never. If Briggs owed them, he was a dead man walking. "That sounds like a you problem, Briggs," she replied. "It becomes a you problem when I tell the Vipers where your little sister lives," the text read. Romy stopped breathing. Sarah. Briggs was talking about Sarah, the young beta she had left in charge of the treat jar. "Leave her out of this," Romy typed, her vision blurring with red rage. "Bring me something from the hoard," the next message demanded. "A watch, one of those old keyboards, something I can fence. Meet me at the old shipyard at midnight, or I give the Vipers Sarah's address." Romy lowered the phone. She looked through the glass doors. Bastian was pacing his office, looking powerful and untouchable. He would fix this if she asked. He would crush Briggs. But if she told Bastian, Briggs might panic. He might send the Vipers to Sarah before Bastian could get there. Or worse, Bastian would go on a rampage, and the city would see the monster, and he would lose the fragile peace he maintained. She looked at her hands. She had promised herself she would never be a tool for Briggs again. She would never let him use her. But for Sarah? No. Romy grit her teeth. Giving in to a blackmailer only guaranteed more blackmail. She texted back, "No, you touch Sarah and I won't need a dragon to end you. I'll do it myself." She blocked the number. Inside the office, Bastian looked up. He caught her eye through the glass. He frowned, sensing the spike in her heart rate, the scent of distress leaking through the door. He ended his call and walked toward the balcony. Romy shoved the phone in her pocket. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. She had to handle Briggs on her own terms. She had to be the one to cut the cord. But Briggs, something in his car miles away, stared at the message not delivered notification. His face twisted into a snarl of desperation. "Fine," he muttered, starting the engine of a borrowed sedan. "She won't bring the payout to me? I'll just have to go get the merchandise myself. And I'll take the girl as a bonus." Chapter 15. The Gift. Bastian knew something was wrong. Romy smelled of anxiety, acrid and sharp like burnt toast. It cut through the vanilla and rain scent he had grown addicted to. He found her in the kitchen, aggressively reorganizing the spice rack for the third time. "Romy," he said softly. She jumped, dropping a jar of cumin. "Jesus, you move too quietly for a giant." Bastian stepped forward, ignoring the spilled spice. "You are distressed. Has Briggs contacted you?" "No," she lied quickly, too quickly. "Just worried about the clinic. Inventory is a mess." Bastian studied her. He knew she was lying. The dragon inside him wanted to roar, to demand the truth, to fly out and burn the city until he found the source of her fear. But the man knew that Romy Paddock valued her independence more than oxygen. Pushing her would only make her build walls. He reached into his pocket. "I have something for you." Romy paused, wiping her hands on a towel. "A subpoena?" "A gift." He placed a long, rectangular box on the island. It wasn't wrapped. Bastian didn't understand wrapping paper. It seemed inefficient. Romy eyed it suspiciously. She reached out and lifted the lid. Inside lay a stethoscope. But not just any stethoscope. It was a Littman Cardiology 4, the gold standard, with a finish of iridescent rainbow metal and black tubing. It was engraved on the chest piece. Dr. Paddock. Then, he reached behind the spice rack and produced a massive, industrial-sized bag of premium freeze-dried duck liver treats that he had hidden earlier. Romy stared at the items. Her hand went to her mouth. "Bastian, this costs more than my car." "The pumpkin has a low book value," Bastian noted dryly. "But the stethoscope, the reviews said the acoustics were superior, and the engraving, it is aspirational, for when you open your own practice." Romy looked up, her hazel eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You engraved doctor on it. I'm just a tech." "You are a healer," Bastian corrected firmly. "The title is inevitable. I simply planned ahead." He picked up the bag of treats. "And these are for the thief. A bribe so he stops stealing my keys." Romy laughed, a wet, choked sound. She reached out, running her fingers over the stethoscope. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't a dress to make her look pretty for him. It was a tool for her. It was an acknowledgement of her dreams, the ones she had never told anyone but Noodle. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" Bastian stepped closer. The heat radiating from him was a warm embrace. He reached out, tucking a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Because you fixed my turntable," he said simply. "Because you sit in the dark with me." His thumb brushed her cheek, and the static spark was gentle this time, a caress rather than a shock. "I take care of what is mine, Romy," he rumbled, his golden eyes burning with possessive intensity. "And I intend to ensure you have everything you need to fly." Romy looked at him, chest going the stethoscope to her chest. The fear of Briggs, the text messages, the vipers, it all faded for a moment. She wasn't alone. She wasn't collateral. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, landlord." Bastian froze, then a slow, heated flush darkened his skin. He touched the spot where her lips had brushed him. "You are welcome," he managed to say, his voice strained. "Now, Noodle is currently attempting to open the wine fridge. We should intervene." Chapter 16. The Spark. The air in the kitchen was heavy, charged with enough static electricity to lift the hair on Romy's arms. It was late, past midnight, but neither of them was sleeping. The gift of the stethoscope sat on the granite island like a promise, but the man who had given it to her was currently standing by the sink, starting at a coffee mug as if it held the secrets of the universe. Romy leaned against the counter, watching him. Bastian had retreated into his shell the moment after the kiss on the cheek. He was scrubbing a pan that was already clean, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "You're going to take the finish off that copper," Romy said softly. Bastian flinched, stopping his scrubbing. He didn't turn around. "It is sticky." "It's clean, Bastian. You're panic cleaning, which is usually my move, by the way." She pushed off the counter and took a step toward him. "Why are you freaking out? It was just a cheek." "It was not just a cheek," Bastian rumbled, his voice tight. He gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles turning white. "You are getting too comfortable. You forget what I am." "I haven't forgotten," Romy said, taking another step. She could feel the heat radiating off him now, a physical wall of warmth that made the cool air of the penthouse bearable. "I know exactly what you are. You're the guy who bought a building so I wouldn't lose my job. You're the guy who lets a ferret steal his watches." "I am a predator," he snapped, spinning around to face her. His eyes were flashing with that dangerous molten gold light. "I am a biological furnace. I destroy things, Romilly. I melt them. I break them. And you—" He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips, then tearing away. "You are soft." "I am not soft," Romy countered, offended. "I slashed Briggs's tires. I carry a knife. I'm a cockroach, Bastian. I survive." She reached out, intending to take the pan from his hand. Bastian moved to intercept her, to stop her from touching the hot metal, or maybe him. Their hands collided in the space between them. Crack! It sounded like a gunshot. A jagged arc of blue electricity, thick as a pencil, snapped between their palms. It wasn't the gentle buzz from before. This was violent. The overhead pendant light surged, flared blindingly white, and then popped with a shower of sparks, plunging the kitchen into semi-darkness. Romy gasped, jerking her hand back. Her palms stung, numb and tingling. Bastian stumbled back into the counter, rattling the cookware. He looked at her hand, then at his own, horror washing over his face. The red glow of his skin began to pulse under the surface of his neck. "See?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "I hurt you." "You didn't," Romy said quickly, flexing her fingers. "It just startled me. Bastian—" "Wait. No." He backed away, navigating the dark kitchen by memory and the red light of his own skin. "Stay back. I need to cool down." He fled. He didn't just walk away. He retreated to the safety of the dark, leaving Romy standing in the kitchen with the smell of ozone and the echo of his fear. Chapter 17. The Surrender. Romy stared at the empty doorway for exactly 10 seconds. Then the anger hit. She wasn't angry at the shock. She wasn't angry at the darkness. She was angry that he was deciding for her. Again, just like Briggs, just like the pack. Everyone treated Romy Paddock like something to be managed, sold, or protected, but never like a partner. "Not this time," she muttered. She marched down the hallway to the master suite. The door was a heavy slab of black wood. She didn't knock. She turned the handle. Locked. "Bastian!" she shouted, pounding on the wood. "Open the door!" "Go away, Romy!" His voice came from inside, muffled and ragged. "It is unsafe." "I don't care about safe," she yelled back. "I care about you being a coward. You say I'm not a tool, you say I'm not collateral, but you're treating me like a fragile piece of glass that you're afraid to smudge. I am not glass, Bastian. I am wolf. We break bones and they knit back together in an hour. Open the damn door." Silence. Then, the heavy thunk of the lock disengaging. The door swung open. Bastian stood there. He had stripped off his shirt again, and the heat rolling out of the room was tropical. His skin was lit from within, a map of veins glowing like lava flows across his chest and arms. He looked terrifying. He looked magnificent. "I could kill you," he said, his voice raw. "If I lose control, if the heat spikes—" "Then don't lose control," Romy said, stepping into the lion's den. She kicked the door shut behind her. Or do. I trust you. She walked right up to him. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. The air around him shimmered. Romy reached out, grabbing the front of his sweatpants to yank him down to her level. You want to know what scares me? She whispered, her face inches from his. Silence scares me. Cold scares me. You just feel like summer. Bastian let out a broken sound, half growl, half sob. His resistance shattered. He didn't pull away this time. He crashed into her. His mouth found hers, hot and demanding. It wasn't a tentative first kiss, it was a collision. He tasted like smoke and expensive scotch. His hands, large and scorching, gripped her waist, lifting her off the floor as if she weighed nothing. Romy wrapped her legs around him, burying her hands in his hair. The static shock was there, a constant prickling storm across her skin, but in the heat of the moment, it felt like champagne bubbles in her blood. It wasn't pain, it was power. He carried her to the massive bed, pressing her into the mattress. He hovered over her, his golden eyes burning. Mine, he growled, the word vibrating against her collarbone. You are mine, Romilly. I will burn the world before I let anyone take you. Then claim me, Romy challenged, arching into his heat. Stop talking and claim me, dragon. When he finally let go of his restraint, it wasn't delicate. It was an avalanche. But even in his wildest desperation, he was careful. He was mindful of his weight, of his heat. He marked her skin with his scent, ozone and fire, and Romy marked him right back with her nails. For the first time in her life, Romy wasn't the collateral. She was the prize. And as the bond snapped into place, locking their souls together with the permanence of iron welding to bone, she knew she would never be cold again. Chapter 18, The Liver Run. The morning sun hit the penthouse floorboards, illuminating the wreckage of clothes scattered across the room. Romy woke up warm. It was a novelty she was still getting used to. Bastian was curled around her from behind, a heavy arm draped over her waist, acting as a personal furnace. He was asleep, his breathing deep and even, the terrifying glow of his skin faded to a healthy human bronze. Romy carefully extracted herself, smiling when he grumbled and grabbed a pillow to replace her. She pulled on one of his shirts, it came down to her knees, and padded out to the kitchen. She felt invincible. The bond in her chest was a hum of contentment, a constant reassurance that he was there, he was hers, and she was his. She made pancakes, a lot of pancakes. When Bastian finally shambled out, hair a disaster and looking smugly exhausted, he ate 12 of them without a word. We are out of coffee, Romy noted, shaking the empty canister. And Noodle is out of vitamins. The liver treats are great, but he needs his ferret vite or he gets flaky skin. Bastian looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. I will have it delivered. No, Romy said, stretching her arms over her head. I need to go out. I need air. And I want to drive the pumpkin. I haven't started her in a week. Her battery will die. Bastian frowned. The protective instinct flared in his eyes. Romy. I'm just going to the pet store on Gentle Breeze Avenue, she promised. It's 20 minutes. I'll be back before you finish your emails. Plus, I want to get ingredients to make you a proper dinner. To say thank you. Bastian hesitated. He checked his internal radar. The bond felt calm. Briggs had been silent for days, and he knew logically he couldn't keep her locked in the tower forever. She was a wolf. She needed to roam. Take the pepper spray, he negotiated, and keep your phone on. Deal. She kissed him, a quick, confident peck on the lips, and grabbed her keys. 30 minutes later, Romy walked out of paws and claws with a tube of high-calorie ferret paste and a bag of catnip mice Noodle didn't need. The Louisiana sun was bright, the air thick with humidity. She felt normal. She felt free. She tossed the bag into the passenger seat of the Volvo and climbed in. She checked her rearview mirror to back out. That's when she saw it. A white Cadillac Escalade was idling 2 rows back. The engine was off, but the windows were tinted dark. Romy froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Briggs! She fumbled for her keys, jamming them into the ignition. The pumpkin groaned, cranked once, and died. No, 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 Romy pleaded, twisting the key again. Come on, old girl, not now. The driver's door of the Escalade opened. Briggs didn't step out. 2 men she didn't recognize did. They were big, shifter muscle, wearing generic work clothes that didn't hide the bulges of weapons at their waists. They weren't walking, they were sprinting toward her car. Chapter 19. The Snatch. Romy didn't wait for the car to start. She slammed the door lock down, but she knew the Volvo's locks were suggestion at best. The first mercenary reached the car. He didn't bother with the handle. He smashed the driver's side window with a baton. Glass exploded inward, showering Romy in safety crystals. Get out! He shouted, reaching through the shattered window to grab her hair. Romy didn't scream. She reacted. She grabbed the canister of pepper spray Bastian had made her take and discharged it directly into the man's face. He roared, falling back, clawing at his eyes. You little, the second man yelled. He yanked the door open, ignoring his partner's screams. Romy unbuckled her seatbelt and scrambled across the center console, kicking at him. Her boot connected with his jaw, snapping his head back, but he was huge, a bear shifter maybe, or a boar. He barely flinched. He grabbed her ankle and dragged her out of the car. Romy hit the asphalt hard, scraping her elbows. She rolled, coming up with her butterfly knife already open in her hand. Back off! She snarled, slashing the air. The mercenary laughed. Cute toy. He lunged. Romy sidestepped, slashing his forearm. Blood welled up, bright red. He grunted, surprised. She wasn't fighting like a terrified girl, she was fighting like a cornered badger. But she didn't see the third man. Briggs had stepped out of the Escalade. He held a tranquilizer pistol, the kind used for capturing large game. Thwip! Romy felt a sharp pinch in her neck. She slapped her hand to the spot, pulling out a small red dart. Wolfsbane. The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't just sleep, it was paralysis. Her legs turned to water. The knife slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the pavement. The world tilted sideways and went gray. Load her up, Briggs ordered, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. Quickly, before the warden smells her panic. The mercenary grabbed Romy's limp body and tossed her into the back of the Escalade like a sack of laundry. As they slammed the doors, nobody noticed the rust-orange Volvo's passenger door was slightly ajar. A brown, furry shape slithered out from under the seat. Noodle, tail puffed to twice its normal size, watched the white SUV peel out of the lot. He didn't chase the car. He was a ferret, not a greyhound. He turned and sprinted toward the storm drain that led to the city's underground tunnels, the tunnels that led directly to the basement of Valco Tower. He had a message to deliver. Chapter 20. The Empty Tower. Bastian was in the middle of a sentence when the coffee mug in his hand exploded. He hadn't squeezed it. The ceramic simply shattered, unable to withstand the sudden, violent spike in his body temperature. Hot coffee splashed over his hand, but he didn't feel it. He felt her. It hit him like a physical blow to the sternum, a wave of cold, suffocating terror that wasn't his own. It was the bond. It was Romy. And then, abruptly, the signal went dark. Not dead, he would have felt that like a ripped soul, but muffled, chemically suppressed. Romy, he whispered. The air in the penthouse began to warp. The temperature skyrocketed from 65 to 90 in seconds. Papers on his desk curled and browned. He was moving before he consciously decided to. He didn't take the elevator. He tore the door to the stairwell off its hinges. He reached the lobby in seconds, terrifying the doorman. He was about to tear the front doors open when a frantic chattering stopped him. A vent grate near the floor rattled and popped off. Noodle shot out, covered in sewer muck, chattering a high-pitched, screaming alarm. He ran to Bastian's feet, biting his pant leg and pulling toward the door. Bastian looked at the ferret. He saw the panic in the small black eyes. He smelled the scent clinging to the ferret's fur, not just sewer, but the metallic tang of Romy's blood and the sickly sweet odor of wolfsbane. Wolfsbane. The man named Bastian Valco died in that moment. The landlord, the investor, the awkward lover, they were incinerated by a rage so ancient it had no name. His skin split. Not literally, but the illusion of humanity fractured. His eyes went fully reptilian, the pupils narrowing to vertical slits in a sea of burning gold. Smoke curled from his nostrils. "They took her," he said. The voice wasn't human. It was the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. Noodle scrambled up his leg to his shoulder, hanging on for dear life. Bastian walked to the massive plate glass window of the lobby that overlooked the city. He didn't bother finding the door. He didn't care about the masquerade. He didn't care about the cameras. He smashed through the glass, sending shards raining onto the sidewalk. He stepped out into the humid Shreveport air. He looked at the skyline. He could feel the faint, fading trail of her bond moving east toward the industrial district. Bastian crouched. The concrete beneath his boots cracked and melted. He launched himself into the air. Mid-leap, the shift took him. It was violent and instantaneous. One moment a man, the next a shadow blocked out the sun. Massive wings, black as obsidian and spanning 50 feet, unfurled with a sound like a thunderclap. Scales hardened over skin. A tail, spiked and lethal, whipped through the air. The obsidian fire drake roared. It was a sound Shreveport hadn't heard in 300 years. It shattered windows for 6 blocks. It set car alarms off across the city. It was a promise of fire. The dragon banked hard, following the scent of the white Escalade. He wasn't hunting a car, he was hunting a dead man. Chapter 21. The Descent. To the citizens of Shreveport, Louisiana, it began as a localized weather anomaly. A sudden pressure drop that popped eardrums, followed by a shadow that swallowed the mid-afternoon sun. Traffic on the Texas Street Bridge ground to a halt as drivers leaned out of their windows, phones raised, capturing the impossible. High above the Red River, Bastian Valco had ceased to exist. In his place was a creature of ancient geometry and obsidian scales. He was 50 feet of aerodynamic malice, his wingspan cutting through the humid air with the sound of tearing canvas. He was in fugue. The rational part of his brain, the part that filed property taxes and worried about thermostat settings, was dormant. In its place was the hoard instinct. It was a binary drive: recover treasure, destroy thief. The wind roared past his ears, but he could hear the specific, terrified heartbeat of the woman in the white SUV. He could smell the acrid chemical tang of the wolfsbane coursing through her veins, a scent that acted like a beacon in the gray fog of the city. Clinging to the ridges of scales behind his massive skull, Noodle the ferret was having the ride of his life. The small creature was flattened against the dragon's neck, eyes squeezed shut against the G-force, claws hooked into the crevices of Bastian's armor. Noodle chattered a war cry that was whipped away by the wind, vibrating with the shared fury of the pack. Bastian banked hard to the left, his tail acting as a rudder. The movement sent a shockwave of displaced air crashing into the river below, kicking up a spray of water 3 stories high. Below, the city was in chaos. Sirens wailed, weaving a discordant tapestry of panic. Bastian ignored them. He ignored the police helicopters scrambling from the local precinct. They were gnats, irrelevant. His focus was locked on the industrial district, a grid of rusted warehouses and forgotten shipping containers. There, a flash of white paint moving too fast through a maze of alleyways, the white Escalade. The sight of the vehicle triggered a spike in Bastian's internal temperature. His scales began to glow from beneath, turning the obsidian into the color of cooling lava. Smoke trailed from his nostrils, twin plumes of gray marking his descent. He didn't just dive, he fell. He tucked his wings tight against his body, turning himself into a kinetic missile. The air around him superheated, shimmering with distortion. He aimed not for the car itself, his instinct warned that the treasure was inside, but for the path ahead of it. He needed to stop them, and he didn't care about traffic laws. As the ground rushed up to meet him, Bastian unfurled his wings at the last possible second. The air displacement shattered the windows of 3 adjacent warehouses. He slammed onto the asphalt of the shipyard access road, his claws gouging deep furrows into the concrete. He roared. It wasn't a roar of warning, it was a roar of possession. It shook the rust off the corrugated metal roofs. It set off car alarms for a mile. It told every living thing in a 10-block radius that the king had arrived, and he was displeased. The white Escalade, rounding the corner at 60 miles per hour, slammed on its brakes. The tires locked, rubber screaming against pavement, as the vehicle skidded to a halt mere yards from the wall of black scales and fire that now blocked the road. Bastian lowered his massive head, his golden eyes narrowing to slits. He could see them through the tinted windshield. The thief. And in the back, the limp form of his missing rib. Smoke curled from his mouth, thick and sulphurous. He didn't attack immediately. He simply waited, a monolith of judgment, daring them to move. Chapter 22. The Warehouse. Romy's world was a blur of gray static and nausea. She was conscious, but only just. The wolfsbane dart had done its job efficiently. It felt as though her blood had been replaced with liquid lead. Her limbs were heavy, disconnected things that refused to obey her commands. She could feel the vibration of the car, smell the cheap leather of the seats, and taste the copper tang of fear in the air. But she couldn't lift her head. "He's blocking the road! Back up! Back up!" That was Briggs. His voice was high, pitched near hysteria. The car lurched backward, tires spinning in gravel, then swung around violently. Romy's head lolled against the window. Through the glass, she saw a blur of black. Scales? Bastian, she thought, the name floating through the fog of drugs. He came. The car slammed into reverse, then accelerated. They crashed through a chain-link fence, metal screeching against paint, and drove into the open bay of a warehouse. The car stopped. Doors opened. Rough hands grabbed Romy by the shoulders. She recognized the fabric of Bastian's shirt she was still wearing and dragged her out. Her boots dragged uselessly on the concrete. "Get her in the chair! Tie her up!" Briggs was shouting. Romy was dumped into a metal chair. Ropes were wound tight around her wrists and ankles. The bite of the rope was grounding. The pain helped clear a fraction of the fog. She blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. They were in a cavernous warehouse filled with crates. Briggs was there, sweating profusely. The 2 mercenaries were reloading their weapons. And there was another man, a tall, scarecrow-thin alpha wearing a snakeskin jacket. Holt, the leader of the Vipers. "You brought heat, Briggs," Holt said, his voice smooth and cold. "I heard a roar. That didn't sound like a siren." "It's nothing," Briggs lied, wiping his forehead with a shaking hand. "Just the weather. Here she is, the asset. She's worth 50 grand. That covers my debt, right?" Holt walked over to Romy. He tilted her chin up with a gloved finger. Romy tried to bite him, but her jaw was too slow. "She's groggy," Holt observed, "and she's wearing a man's shirt that smells like sulfur." "She's a service Omega," Briggs stammered. "High quality, trained. Just take her and clear my ledger." Romy summoned every ounce of willpower she possessed. She focused on her tongue, forcing it to move. "He's not selling a wolf," Romy slurred. Her voice was weak, but the defiance was absolute. Holt looked at her. "What did you say, darling?" Romy took a breath, fighting the paralysis. "I said, you think you're buying a wolf, but you just stole from a dragon." Briggs turned pale. "Shut up, Romy!" "He's here," Romy whispered, a crooked smile touching her lips. "I can feel him." "He's going to peel this place open like a tin can." Holt looked from Romy to Briggs. "What is she talking about? Who is he?" "Nobody!" Briggs shrieked. "She's delusional! The drug—" Screech! The sound came from above. It was the sound of metal tearing under immense stress. Everyone froze. They looked up. Giant obsidian claws had punched through the corrugated steel roof of the warehouse. Sunlight streamed through the gashes, illuminating the dust motes. The claws flexed. The metal groaned, rivets popping like gunfire. "What in God's name?" Holt stepped back, drawing a pistol. With a sound like a bomb detonating, the entire roof section was ripped away. It wasn't lifted, it was peeled back and discarded. The sky suddenly filled the view, but it wasn't blue. It was black scales and fire. A massive head, round with spikes and eyes of burning gold, lowered through the hole in the ceiling. Smoke poured from the creature's maw, pooling on the warehouse floor. Romy looked up at the nightmare staring down at them and laughed softly. "Told you," she whispered. Chapter 23. Fire and Fury. The warehouse erupted into chaos. "Dragon!" one of the mercenaries screamed, a belated and entirely obvious observation. Holt didn't scream. He fired. He raised his handgun and emptied the clip at the massive head looming above them. Ping, ping, ping! The bullet struck Bastian's scales and flattened instantly, falling to the concrete like harmless metal rain. Bastian didn't even blink. He opened his mouth. A cone of fire, white-hot and precise, washed over the mercenaries. It wasn't a wild spray, it was a surgical strike. The fire washed over the space where the men stood, a warning shot of pure heat. They didn't have time to scream before the thermal shock knocked the wind out of them. They dove behind a stack of crates just as the flames licked their boots, scrambling away with their clothes smoking. Bastian dropped into the warehouse, his massive bulk landing with a tremor that cracked the foundation. He ignored the men. He turned his attention to the white Escalade, the symbol of Briggs's vanity, the vehicle that had taken his treasure. Bastian unleashed a torrent of flame directly onto the SUV. The paint bubbled and peeled in a microsecond. The glass melted into liquid silica. The metal frame groaned, drooping like wax, collapsing in on itself until the luxury car was nothing but a puddle of slag and burning rubber. Briggs fell to his knees, watching his lease payments evaporate. My car! My car!" Noodle, who had been clinging to Bastian's neck, chose this moment to disembark. The ferret slid down the dragon's leg, hit the ground running, and scurried over to Romy's chair. He chattered frantically, climbing up her leg to check her face, his small paws patting her cheeks. "Hey, buddy," Romy whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "You brought the cavalry." Bastian turned his massive head toward Briggs and Holt. He inhaled deeply, the sound like a jet engine spinning up. "Don't shoot!" Holt yelled, throwing his gun down. "I surrender! I didn't know! I didn't know!" Bastian paused. The fire in his throat dimmed slightly. He wasn't a mindless beast. The fugue was receding, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. He looked at Romy, tied to the chair, paralyzed but alive. He moved toward her. Briggs scrambled backward, crab-walking across the dirty floor. "Warden! Warden, please! It was a misunderstanding!" Briggs pleaded. Bastian ignored him. He lowered his snout to Romy. The heat radiating from him was intense, burning off the chill of the wolfsbane. He nudged her shoulder gently with his nose, inhaling her scent to confirm she was whole. Romy leaned her head against his scales. They were hot, smooth as glass and hard as diamond. "I'm okay," she murmured. "Just stuck." Bastian let out a low rumble that vibrated in her bones. He lifted his head and looked at the ropes binding her. A quick, controlled puff of flame, no larger than a candle flicker, severed the ropes at her wrists without singing a hair on her arm. He looked at Briggs again. The dragon's eyes narrowed. The time for fire was over. The time for judgment had begun. The air shimmered around the massive black form. The outline of the dragon began to blur, shrinking, condensing. Steam hissed as matter was rearranged. The shift back was violent. It sounded like wet leather snapping and stones grinding together. The 50-foot beast collapsed inward, reforming into the shape of a man. Chapter 24. The Wait. Bastian Valco stood in the center of the warehouse, amidst the cooling slag of the Escalade and the terrified whimpers of the vipers. He was unclothed, having shredded his garments during the first shift, but the shadows and the steam rising from his skin clothed him in darkness. He didn't look human. He looked like a natural disaster that had decided to pause its devastation for a brief conversation. His skin was still glowing with subsurface magma, veins of fire tracing his neck and arms. He walked toward Briggs. Every step left a charred footprint on the concrete. Briggs was backed against a pallet of stolen electronics, shaking so hard his teeth clicked audibly. "Bastian, wait! We can work this out!" Bastian didn't speak. He reached out and grabbed Briggs by the throat. He lifted the Alpha one-handed, feet dangling 6 inches off the floor. Bastian didn't strain. He didn't grimace. He held Briggs with the casual indifference of a man holding a dirty rag. "You," Bastian said. His voice was a wreck, a grind of gravel and smoke, barely intelligible. "You stole from me." I... Briggs gagged, clawing uselessly at the forearm that felt like a steel pylon. "I gave you a chance," Bastian continued, his golden eyes burning with zero empathy. "I bought your debt. I saved your territory. I protected your pack." He slammed Briggs against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of the Alpha. "And you paid me by stealing the only thing I care about." Bastian leaned in, his face inches from Briggs. The heat coming off him began to singe Briggs's eyebrows. "You sold her to die," Bastian whispered. The words were heavy, landing with the weight of a judge's gavel. "I kept her to live. She is my treasure, and I do not share." He squeezed, not enough to crush the windpipe yet, but enough to let Briggs know that death was a simple flex away. "Please," Briggs wheezed. "Mercy." "Mercy?" Bastian tilted his head. "Dragons do not have mercy, Alpha Briggs. We have appetites." He raised his other hand, fingers curling into a claw. Smoke curled from his fingertips. He prepared to end the problem permanently. "Bastian, stop!" The voice was weak, raspy, but it cut through the red haze of Bastian's rage like a knife. He froze. He didn't drop Briggs, but he didn't strike. He turned his head slowly. Romy was standing. She was swaying, holding onto the metal chair for support, her legs trembling from the after effects of the wolfsbane. Noodle was perched on her shoulder, chattering warningly at Briggs. "Put him down," Romy said. Chapter 25. The Mercy. Bastian looked at Romy, confusion warring with the fury in his eyes. "He took you," Bastian growled. "He hurt you. He tried to sell you to—" He glanced at Holt, who was currently trying to blend into the wall. "He dies." "If you kill him," Romy said, taking a shaky step forward, "you have to clean it up, and I am not helping you scrub alpha blood out of concrete. I've done enough cleaning this week." It was a joke. A weak one, but it was Romy. It was her way of pulling him back from the edge of the abyss. "He does not deserve to live," Bastian argued, though his grip on Briggs's throat loosened by a fraction of an inch. "No, he doesn't," Romy agreed. She limped closer, her boots scuffing the floor. She stopped right in front of Bastian, ignoring the heat radiating from him, ignoring the naked violence in his posture. She reached out and placed her hand on his forearm, the one holding Briggs. The static shock was small this time, a greeting. "But if you kill him, you're just the monster they think you are," Romy whispered. "You're the dragon who burns things. Be the warden instead. Be the king." She looked up at him, her hazel eyes steady. "Besides, death is too easy. He's a coward, Bastian. Dying is an escape. Make him live with what he lost." Bastian looked at her. He saw the bruises on her elbows. He saw the dart wound on her neck. But he also saw the fierce intelligence, the pragmatic mercy that defined her. She wasn't asking him to spare Briggs out of pity, she was asking him to spare Briggs out of spite. Bastian's lips quirked into a terrifying smile. "As you wish, my treasure." He dropped Briggs. The alpha hit the floor in a heap, gasping for air, clutching his throat. He looked up, expecting the final blow. "You are no longer alpha," Bastian announced, his voice booming through the warehouse. He looked at Holt and the mercenaries. "Witness this. Briggs is stripped of rank. He is stripped of territory." He turned to Romy. "What is his sentence?" Romy looked down at the man who had tormented her for years, the man who had gambled away their future and sold her to cover his mistakes. "The kennels," Romy said coldly. "We have 30 dogs in the pack. They produce a lot of waste. We need a sanitation manager." She leaned down, getting face to face with Briggs. "You wanted to clear your ledger? Fine. You can shovel shit until the debt is paid. Every single dropping." Briggs looked horrified. You can't. And Noodle," Romy added, pointing to the ferret. "Noodle has a sensitive stomach. You're in charge of his litter box, too. If I see one speck of dust, Briggs, I will let the dragon finish what he started." Noodle hissed at Briggs, baring his teeth. Bastian stepped back, wrapping an arm around Romy's waist to support her. "You heard the queen," he rumbled. "Get a shovel." He turned to Holt, who was trembling. "And you trespassed in my city. You touched my mate." Holt held up his hands. "I'm leaving. I'm gone. The Vipers will never come back to Shreveport." "See that you don't," Bastian said, "or next time I won't shift back." He scooped Romy up into his arms, bridal style. She buried her face in his neck, the heat of his skin finally driving the last of the cold numbness from her bones. "Let's go home," Bastian said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I believe I owe you a new car." "You owe me a new car," Romy mumbled against his chest, her eyes closing. "And 12 pancakes." Done. Chapter 26. The New Order. The ride from the ruined warehouse to the pack house was silent, mostly because the driver of the black SUV, one of Bastian's asset management team who had arrived with a fresh suit for his boss, was too terrified to breathe. Romy sat in the back seat, leaning heavily against Bastian. The wolfsbane was finally metabolizing, but it left her feeling like she had been tumble-dried with a bag of bricks. Her limbs were heavy, and her head swam with a dull, throbbing ache. But the warmth coming off Bastian was better than any painkiller. He was dressed again, wearing a crisp charcoal suit that hid the soot and the violence of the last hour, but the energy around him was still volatile. He wasn't just the landlord anymore, he was the conqueror. "We are here," Bastian announced as the SUV pulled onto the gravel driveway of the pack duplexes. The pack was gathered on the lawn. Word of the dragon's sighting and the column of smoke rising from the industrial district had traveled fast. They looked terrified. When Bastian stepped out of the car, adjusting his cuffs, 30 wolves took a collective step back. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like an eviction notice wrapped in a natural disaster. Bastian walked around the car and opened Romy's door. He didn't let her walk. He scooped her up again, ignoring her weak protest. "I can walk," she mumbled. "I just need a cane or a walker." "You are compromised," Bastian stated, carrying her up the porch steps like she was made of spun glass. Noodle sat on his shoulder, looking down at the gathered wolves with imperious judgment. Bastian turned to face the crowd. His golden eyes swept over them, the fighters, the mothers clutching pups, the elders. "Alpha Briggs is removed." Bastian's voice boomed, deep enough to rattle the windows in their frames. "He sold one of your own to save his skin. He brought enemies into my city. He has forfeited his right to lead." A murmur of shock and confusion rippled through the crowd. Wolves looked at each other, uncertain. The pack hierarchy was absolute. An alpha could only be replaced by a challenger who killed him. "I have claimed this territory," Bastian continued, the heat radiating from him causing the grass near the porch to brown slightly. "This land is mine. The debt is paid. You are no longer tenants. You are mine." The implication hung in the humid air. He wasn't offering a lease. He was offering protection under the banner of the dragon. "Who speaks for you?" Bastian demanded. Silence. Then Sarah stepped forward. The young beta was shaking, clutching her ragged teddy bear, but her chin was high. She looked at Romy, limp in Bastian's arms, then at the terrifying man holding her. "Romy speaks for us," Sarah said, her voice trembling but clear. "She always has." Bastian looked down at Romy. "Well, my queen, what is your command?" Romy shifted, forcing herself to sit up straighter in his arms. She looked at the faces she had fed, bandaged, and balanced books for. She didn't want to be alpha. Alphas were politicians. She was a healer. "Sarah runs the day-to-day," Romy rasped, her voice gaining strength. "She knows the schedules, she knows the accounts. She's the new manager." "A beta?" a large fighter grumbled from the back. Bastian's head snapped toward him. A low growl, sounding like grinding stones, vibrated in his chest. "Do you question her judgment?" The fighter paled and looked at his shoes. No, sir." "Sarah is manager," Bastian declared, "and Romy Paddock is protected. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me, and I do not have a sense of humor about my property." Chapter 27. The Punishment. A second SUV pulled up. Two of Bastian's security personnel dragged a sullen, soot-stained figure out of the back. Briggs hit the gravel hard. He was stripped of his suit jacket, his shirt torn, his face a mask of defeat. The pack gasped. Seeing their alpha, the man who had demanded their absolute submission, kneeling in the dirt was a paradigm shift. "This man," Bastian announced, pointing a finger at Briggs, "attempted to traffic my mate. The penalty is death." He paused, letting the fear soak into Briggs's bones. "But," Bastian continued, "Romy has requested mercy. She believes in utility." Romy tapped Bastian's shoulder, signaling him to put her down. He hesitated, then lowered her feet to the porch, keeping a steadying arm around her waist. Romy leaned against the railing, looking down at Briggs. The wolfsbane fog was lifting, replaced by a cold clarity. "You stole from the pup's food fund," Romy said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent lawn. "You gambled away the roof over their heads. You used us, Briggs. You didn't lead us." Briggs glared up at her, though the fire in his eyes was dim. "I did what I had to do." "So am I," Romy said. She gestured to the side of the house where the kennels were located. "We have 30 dogs. That's a lot of waste, Briggs. And since we fired the landscaping crew to pay your bookie last month, the yard is a minefield." She pointed to a rusted shovel leaning against the rotting porch railing, a tool left out to rust by a landscaping crew that hadn't been paid in months. "Pick it up." Briggs stared at the shovel. "You can't be serious. I am an alpha." "You are a tenant with a past due balance," Bastian corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "And the landlord is watching." Briggs flinched. Slowly, humiliated, he stood up and walked to the shovel. He picked it up. His hands, usually manicured and holding cigars, looked alien wrapped around the splintered wood. "The kennels first," Romy ordered. "Then the yard. And Briggs, Noodle eats a high-protein diet. Don't miss a spot." On cue, Noodle scurried down Bastian's arm, ran across the porch railing, and hissed directly in Briggs's face. It was a sound of pure mockery. "You heard the lady," Bastian said. "Get to work." As Briggs trudged toward the kennels, a defeated man with a rusted shovel, the pack didn't bow. They didn't cheer. They just watched, and one by one, they turned to look at Romy, not with fear, but with relief. Sarah walked up the steps. She didn't hug Romy. She was too respectful of the dragon looming behind her. She just nodded. "I'll handle the schedule," Sarah said. "Go home, Romy. You look like hell." "Thanks, Sarah." Romy smiled weakly. She leaned back into Bastian's heat. Take me home, dragon. I'm done with wolves for today. Chapter 28. Recovery. The return to Valco Tower was a blur of elevators and biometric scans. When the doors to the penthouse slid open, the rush of cool, filtered air, set to 65 degrees, felt like a blessing against Romy's feverish skin. Bastian didn't ask. He carried her straight to the master bath. The tub was a monolith of black stone, deep enough to submerge a small car. Bastian set her down on the vanity stool and turned on the taps. Steam began to rise, smelling of eucalyptus and rain. I can bathe myself, Romy murmured, though lifting her arms seemed like a monumental task. You are shaking, Bastian noted. He began to strip off his ruined suit jacket, tossing it carelessly onto the floor. And you smell of that warehouse and him. He knelt in front of her, his movements surprisingly gentle for a creature that had melted a car an hour ago. He unbuttoned the soot-stained shirt she was wearing, his shirt, and helped her slide it off. When Romy was in the water, sinking into the heat, she let out a groan of pure pleasure. The hot water leached the last of the wolfsbane chill from her marrow. Bastian didn't leave. He sat on the edge of the tub, rolling up his sleeves. He dipped a washcloth into the water and began to clean the soot from her shoulder. I should have been faster, he said quietly, his eyes focused on the bruise forming on her arm where the mercenary had grabbed her. I felt your fear, Romy. It tore me apart. You were fast enough, Romy whispered, reaching out to touch his wet hand. The static shock was gone, likely because they were both grounded by the water, or perhaps the bond had settled into a hum rather than a spark. You came for me. No one has ever come for me, Bastian. I've always had to save myself. Bastian looked at her, his golden eyes raw with emotion. I will always come for you. If you are in the dark, I will be the fire. Just maybe don't melt downtown Shreveport next time, Romy teased gently. The news is going to be wild tomorrow. Let them talk, Bastian grunted, squeezing the washcloth over her back. They needed a reminder of who keeps the monsters in line. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. I was terrified. When the bond went mute, I thought I had lost the hoard. I thought I was alone again. You're stuck with me, Romy promised, closing her eyes. I'm like glitter. You can't get rid of me. Good, Bastian breathed, because I intend to keep you forever. He stayed there until the water cooled, washing away the dirt of the old life, baptizing her into the new one. He wasn't just cleaning her, he was worshipping her. And Romy, the collateral who had become the queen, finally let herself be taken care of. Chapter 29. The Upgrade. 3 days later, Romy felt human again. The bruises were fading to yellow, and her energy was back. She was currently standing in the center of the massive underground garage of Valco Tower, hands on her hips, staring at a monstrosity. Bastian, she said, what did you do to the pumpkin? I thought it was still at the pet store. My security team retrieved it while you were recovering, Bastian said, looking immensely pleased with himself. It required adjustments. The pumpkin sat in the center of the bay. On the outside, it was still the same rust-orange 1990 Volvo 240 wagon. It still had the dent in the rear bumper and the "I brake for ferrets" sticker. But the tires were wider. The exhaust pipe was chrome, and when she peeked inside, the torn fabric seats had been replaced with high-impact racing buckets upholstered in Italian leather. I fulfilled my promise, Bastian said, looking immensely pleased with himself. He leaned against the matte black Lincoln, crossing his arms. You refused a new car. You said you liked the aesthetic of the Volvo. I see a roll cage, Romy pointed out. And is that bulletproof glass? Polycarbonate laminate, Bastian corrected. It can stop a high-caliber round, or a disgruntled werewolf. Pop the hood, Romy ordered. Bastian popped the hood. Romy stared. Gone was the sensible, chugging four-cylinder engine. In its place was a beast, a supercharged V8 that looked like it belonged in a muscle car, squeezed into the Volvo's engine bay with surgical precision. "It has 700 horsepower," Bastian explained casually. "I also reinforced the chassis, upgraded the suspension to rally spec, and installed a remote starter." 700, Romy repeated. "Bastian, I drive to the grocery store. I don't drag race in the Fast and Furious." "It is necessary for evasion," Bastian argued, his protective streak flaring. "If Briggs, or anyone else, tries to box you in again, you can simply drive through them, or over them." Romy looked at the Frankenstein car. It was ridiculous. It was excessive. It was exactly the kind of gift a paranoid dragon would give his mate. She laughed. "It's a sleeper. Looks like junk, drives like a tank." "It is a dragon-class Volvo," Bastian corrected haughtily. "And the pancakes?" Romy asked, raising an eyebrow. "That was part of the deal." "Upstairs," Bastian said. "I have prepared the batter, though Noodle has stolen the whisk." Romy walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He was warm, solid, and safe. "You're insane, you know that?" "I am thorough," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Go, start it." Romy climbed into the driver's seat. It felt different, solid, heavy. She turned the key. The pumpkin didn't sputter, it roared. A deep, guttural growl that shook the concrete floor. It sounded like a beast waking up. Romy grinned, revving the engine once. It was the sound of freedom. "Okay," she admitted, shouting over the engine. "This is pretty cool." Bastian smiled, the gold in his eyes flashing. "Only the best for the hoard." Chapter 30, The Ultimate Hoard, Epilogue. 8 months later. The hoard room had undergone a transformation. The towering shelves of vintage synthesizers and tube amps had been pushed to the perimeter. The center of the room was now dominated by a massive, hand-carved crib made of fireproof blackwood, lined with the softest velvet money could buy. Bastian Valco stood in the center of the room, holding a baby monitor that was currently screeching with white noise. He looked distressed. "It uses a digital frequency," he complained, tapping the screen as the image distorted into static. "I am scrambling the signal just by holding it. I need to find an analog radio monitor from 1980. "Bastian, stop engineering the nursery," Romy's voice drifted from the doorway. "The baby isn't going to care about signal-to-noise ratios." Romy waddled into the room. She was huge. The oversized hoodie she loved so much was stretched tight over a very prominent, very low baby bump. She was rubbing her lower back, looking exhausted but radiant. "I am merely ensuring perimeter security," Bastian huffed, setting the monitor down. He walked to her immediately, his hands going to her waist to support her weight. "You should be sitting. Your ankles." "My ankles are fine. I wanted to see the crib," Romy said, leaning into him. Noodle scurried into the room, a stolen pacifier in his mouth. He ran straight to Romy, climbed up her leg, which was a slower process these days, and settled on the shelf of her belly. He pressed his ear against the fabric, chattering softly. "He's obsessed," Romy laughed. "He thinks it's a giant ferret." "He knows it is a pack member," Bastian corrected. He dropped to his knees, disregarding his expensive suit pants. The Dragon King, the terrifying warden of Shreveport, pressed his ear to Romy's stomach, right next to the ferret. He closed his eyes. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. The heartbeat was strong, fast, and it carried a strange, rhythmic echo, like the bellows of a tiny forge. "Do you hear it?" Romy whispered, running her fingers through his dark hair. "I hear it," Bastian breathed. His voice was thick, choked with an emotion too big for words. For 300 years he had been the period at the end of a sentence, the last ash, the silence. He had collected old machines because they were the only things that endured. But this was new. This was a future. He felt a distinct, sharp kick against his cheek. Bastian jerked back, eyes wide and glowing gold. "It kicked me," he said, awestruck. "It is strong." "It's a dragon wolf," Romy reminded him. "It's probably trying to redecorate in there." Bastian rested his forehead against her bump, his hands spanning the curve of her stomach. The heat radiating from him was gentle, a perfect incubator warmth. "I thought I was the end," he whispered, his thumb tracing a circle over her navel. "I thought the fire would die with me." "The fire is just starting, landlord," Romy murmured, bending down to kiss his forehead. Bastian looked up at the shelves of vintage gold watches and rare electronics. Then he looked back at Romy, at the ferret guarding her belly, and the life growing inside her. He smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the room. "The gold was just metal," he said softly. This is the only hoard that matters." The end.